Here's the intro. Got a case of 90s Frogger stuff over here. Oh, way past cool. Please don't say that. Okay. So I guess I'll start with the 1997 Frogger game then. Actually there's something before that. Why don't you take a look? Oh hey, there is. I'll just start with that then. Back in 1991, there was a Frogger game being made for Game Gear. It was being developed by S-Plan and was set to be published by Sega. The game was eventually cancelled, possibly due to licensing issues. But thanks to whoever leaked the prototype of the game, using the good old internet, we are able to play it through emulation. So, why don't we see how the game is, as far in development as it got. Well, wasn't expecting this kind of Frogger. Now as you can imagine, this will probably just be a port of an original game. Yeah, this plays like no other Frogger game, at least from what I've seen. Well okay, it's mostly the same gameplay style. You still hop, eat flies, etc. But what makes this one different, other than the graphics and levels, is the goal of the game. This is the first game where you actually use Frogger, rather than the game itself just being called Frogger. This time you rescue other frogs, but that's not the end of it. After collecting all 3 per level, you take them back to a house. This is actually a really interesting way to change things up while still feeling like Frogger. It's like they took the pink frog mechanic, added 2 extras, and made that the goal of the game. The next level has more of your usual hazards. Water, snakes, gators, tanks, all that stuff. You can actually ride the tank's guns, so that's amusing. One thing I was also kinda surprised by was the fact that the level themes do change up a bit. I mean, it's mostly color changes, but I thought for sure that the music would stay the same. But nope, it changes, and it's very appreciated. Speaking of, the music is pretty nice, albeit a little repetitive, which is why I'm glad it changes with every world. Seems to me like this game was mostly finished before it was cancelled. Wish I knew for sure why it was cancelled, cause this would have been a great game to play officially. Probably wouldn't have been my favorite Frogger game, but it would have been up there if the finished version of this game would have been like what I played. I wish Konami would release an official way to play this game, cause this is great. I would definitely give this a try if you can learn about emulation. From what I played, it's really fun. Now I can talk about Frogger He's Back for the 4th, or depending on how you look at it, 6th time. If you've been on this channel, you basically know how I feel about the PS1 version of this game, assuming you watch those videos. This was the first game I ever reviewed. Then I reviewed it for the 20th anniversary, and then again to start DRS. So rather than doing a full review of it again, I'll just briefly go over it, as well as the other versions. The PS1 version, which was released in September of 1997, is an all-time classic for me. The first world you start out on is set up like the classic arcade game, just with a zoomed-in camera. But other worlds completely change up the patterns you may have been used to with the first game. And rather than guiding frogs to their homes, you instead rescue baby frogs. Though the main goal of the game isn't really gathering all the different colored baby frogs, that's just how you beat the levels. Well, okay, you do have to get them to progress, but the real main goal of the game is to gather all the golden baby frogs. These unlock more worlds, which also gives access to find more gold frogs. You can beat the game if you've unlocked the final level and beat it, but to get the true ending, you must get all the gold frogs. The rest of the game is mostly for high scores. Now of course this game is far from perfect, as it seems mostly only people like me who grew up with the game still find it great. It is clunky, the controls don't always work, the graphics, while colorful, aren't the greatest, and the camera can be a real pain at times. But even if you're not a Frogger fan, I do think it's still worth checking out. If you're wondering about the PC version, it's the same as the PS1 version with minor differences here and there. It all depends on what computer you play it on and how you have the settings set. Now as for the other versions, they're just the original game with various forms of graphics and sounds. The SNES version is probably the weakest. It really feels like something you'd find online, not an officially released version. It has almost no music, if any at all, and the sound effects and graphics are kind of mediocre. Now the Genesis version is a bit of a different story. This was just a straight up port of the arcade game. You could kind of see this as a lazier port than the SNES version, but really it feels more faithful. Like they knew they didn't have the biggest budget, so instead of half-assing it, They took the classic game people love and ported it to the Genesis. Interesting fact, these two were the last officially released games in North America for those systems, both in 1998. Why they didn't just make this for the Nintendo 64 and Sega Saturn is beyond me. Okay, I know why with the Saturn at least. Now as for the portable scene, we have the Game Boy versions. For some reason there's a gray cartridge version, but the version I've played more is the Game Boy Color version. It's the same game, just with more color. Not much to say, it's the original game with different graphics and almost no music, but more than the SNES version. What made this one good at the time was the fact that it was the first official way to play Frogger on the go, as far as I know of. It's not needed as much now, but it's still fun if you want to give it a try. The only other version I can think of is the one on the Tiger Gamecom. I haven't played this version of the game, but I'm not going out of my way to play it. It looks like it's just the Genesis version but without color. If you count these, there are the Tiger Electronics toys. One of them is like your traditional Tiger game, and the other being in the shape of Frogger himself, the latter of which I have played and still have to this day. It's interesting because you use Frogger's legs to move in the game. The first version is probably more practical, but the version I have can be used as a regular toy if you wanted to. So if I were to rank the different versions that I've played from worst to best, it would go like this. SNES, then Game Boy Color, then Genesis, and then PS1/PC. The Tiger one I have is more of a toy to me. But yeah, those are my brief thoughts on Frogger He's Back, /Frogger 3D, /Frogger 1997. Well, I guess that's it for Frogger in the 90s. Wait. Yeah, there's one game left. But Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge was from 2000. Well, it all depends on how you look at it. Some might say 2000 was the last year of the 1990s. Well, there really wasn't that much to talk about with Frogger in the 90s, so I'll count this one. I have already reviewed this game before, but it's been a long time, so I'll go over it again. Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge was released in September of 2000 for PS1, PC, and Game Boy Color, and October of 2000 for Dreamcast. There was a planned N64 version of the game, but it was cancelled. More on that later. Let's take a look at the PS1 version first. We start things off with a cutscene showing why the subtitle is Swampy's Revenge. Look, I can imagine being jumped on wouldn't feel too good, but good lord. The plot of this game is simplistic, but it does give enough motivation to see what the rest of the game is like. The main menu has you using Frogger to hop to different options. I mean, it's not super complicated, it's just a fancy version of a main menu. Before we officially start the story mode, we have to get through training first. This level has everything you need to know about the game, for the most part. The gameplay still plays like basic Frogger, but this time around it has a fixed camera. It only rotates when it needs to, and it does it automatically, unlike He's Back. Also this time around, Frogger has new moves, the biggest one being the double jump. Pressing the jump button once basically has Frogger doing what he did in the previous game, but pressing it again right after makes Frogger double jump. This lets him skip tiles and get to higher places. Also new is the updated croaking. Now you let out some sort of signal which lets you kind of see where the baby frogs are when they croak. It's a nice touch. After beating the training area, the story officially begins. That little opening is just showing why Swampy is mad at Frogger. Swampy kidnaps the baby frogs, who now look more like baby frogs who just got out of being tadpoles. These baby frogs are actually Frogger's girlfriend Lily's little siblings. Where her parents are is left up to the imagination. Yeah, good babysitting skills there, guys. Anyway, after realizing the babies are gone, Frogger and Lily go out to search for them. We start things off in the gardens. Frogger has to get past different types of lawnmowers and bees. One thing that's very different about this game is that you don't get sent back to the start of the level when you rescue a frog. Instead, they act as checkpoints most of the time. This game is a lot more linear than the previous game. The goal is still to collect all the baby frogs, but for a majority of the levels, it's done in a very linear fashion. There are also no gold frogs to collect, but that's alright. Boulder Canyon changes things up by having us use Lily. Lily plays just like Frogger. The only differences are the looks and the voice. You may have noticed that I've been collecting these coins. There are 25 of these per level. But what do? Well, I'll explain later. The lives still work the same. They still come in the form of flies, they just look different.
How could this happen to me? I made my mistakes.
The gold mine has us using Frogger again. Something you may have noticed is the video is kind of fuzzy. Well, I took this from my Just Some Gameplay channel, straight from YouTube. Something else you may have noticed is that the frame rate is lower. Not sure what the reason is, but it doesn't hinder the gameplay as much. If you play this on PC or Dreamcast, the frame rate is higher and the graphics are more detailed. It's similar to playing Rayman 2 on those systems.
You're going straight to hell. Why, you little...
Grindstone has Lily going through a jungle with weird looking enemies. Pyramid Climb has us climbing a pyramid. It has fun slides. Something I forgot to mention earlier is that if you hold the jump button after the second jump, you'll do this little glide. It can come in handy if you're about to run into an enemy or almost miss a tile. The ant's nest has you navigating through the nest of ants. There are the little ants and the questionable ants. There's also a secret room that's full of these lives, so that's neat. Lava palaver is a bit on the tough side. You have to watch out for, you guessed it, lava. As well as fireballs and these spawns of Satan. Seriously, what are these creatures? I feel ya, Frogger. Defivco Lab, or Disco Lab, has nothing really to do with Disco. I guess that's why there's a 5 there. Big difference. This place really tests your double jumping skills. I love doing that. Yeah, I discovered this as a kid. As the game loads, keep pressing the croak button and whoever you're using will do what I just started calling multi-croak. This won't work unless you're doing it in story mode or playing the training level. Anyway, Research Facility has you going through different levels of experiments, including these poor exposed brain blue monkeys. It has that classic Frogger style of having to hurry but also wait at the same time. After Lily activates the ship from inside, making Frogger think he did it, they head out to space. Space Chase is a very different level. Once you get on this ship thing, you only hop left or right. You start chasing Swampy, who looks like one of those instant Martian bird things from Looney Tunes from the back. He'll drop bombs and missiles at you as you go side to side to dodge them. He'll eventually drop frogs for you to rescue. It's a nice change up from the normal levels. Space Station brings back something from the previous game. Once you get a frog, you get teleported back to the beginning. Thankfully, there's no time limit, unless you're on time attack, and it's not that big of a level. It also has these buttons you press to activate or deactivate something. A bit too much hype there. Infernal Machine is another level that tests your jumping and double jumping skills. For the most part, it's a side-scroller, so that's different. Space Suckers has a similar setup to Space Station, where once you get a frog, you're back at the beginning. Only this time you do get frogs in a certain order, so it's more linear like most of the game. Something you might have noticed is that Frogger and Lily have been eating different types of bugs. Where the previous game had you eating bugs mostly for points or time, this game has you eating bugs that give you power-ups, such as Quick Hop and Auto Hop, which, well, the names basically say what they do. Just be careful when you're using them, cause the camera isn't always great at catching up with you. In this kind of intense scene, Frogger reads Swampy's plans and goes after him, like he's been doing this whole time. Graveyard Garden has a very Castlevania vibe to it. Konami, you silly. It's a bit spooky and scary and kind of violent for a Frogger game. Alright, maybe not. You've most likely noticed this for a while now, but if you look at Frogger's back, he has a yellow stripe. In He's Back, he has a red stripe on his back. So he decided to go with a mustard this year instead of the ketchup. Why the change? I'm not really sure. You're a real romantic, Frogger. Haunted house. I mean, the name says it all. What do you expect, Family Matters?
Oh dear God, it's walking fingers.
For the most part, it's a standard level, but they do have creative moments. Like how you have to not be killed by this ghost while you're trying to rescue the purple frog. But the ghost keeps moving the purple frog, so you have to keep going until the ghost gives up. Frogger goes on a dark log ride and finds Lily, who's been captured. Swampy then starts a machine that puts baby frogs in the boxes, I'm assuming to be sold. Luckily, Frogger is there to let Lily out, and what the heck are you doing, Frogger? You're a real romantic, Frogger. But as luck would have it, a little blue frog named Tad escapes the machine. Then you go on to the last level of the game, Wind Up, where you use Tad. This one is a simple make it to the end kind of level. There aren't even any baby frogs to save, you just have to make it without dying. After that is the boss level with Swampy. I'm kidding, that was it. Tad messes around with the machines, rescues Frogger and Lily, and shows them where the rest of the captured frogs are. They escape, Swampy doesn't, and the sun comes up. That was sort of anticlimactic, but it had some action for the ending. So how about those coins? Well, after you collect all 25 coins per level, you unlock bonus levels for the time attack mode. These come in the form of levels that look like they're from the arcade game. After unlocking all levels, you start unlocking characters. And after that, you unlock cheats and a concept art movie. So it's definitely worth getting all the coins. Now allow me to go over all characters that aren't playable in the story mode. Treevee, whose name for years I pronounced as Trevi, is a green frog who sounds like the Goofy of the group. He's the only character who isn't used in the story mode that is unlocked right away. Wart is a toad who sounds like the old wise man of the group, or at least like the Cranky Kong of the group. Tank's 2D picture makes him look like a mummy, but he's actually a robot frog who looks nothing like that in 3D. Were we catfished by Tank? Anyway, he's the robot friend of the group. Ruby is a female kangaroo that sounds like... I'm not even gonna open that can of worms. And the final unlockable character is... Swampy. On one of those rideable bouncy ball things. I mean, sure, why not? Well, before I wrap things up, let's look at the multiplayer. The multiplayer mode has enough content here to have at least half an hour of fun. There are racing levels, where you try to be the first to make it to the finish line. There are these levels that play like Tron, where you move automatically and try not to run into the opponent's blocks or your own blocks. And the rest are like the previous one's multiplayer, whoever gets the most wins. Previous one had flags, but this one sticks with baby frogs. The multiplayer is not a must-play for this game, but it is kind of fun with a friend for a little while. I very much enjoyed Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge on PS1. Unlike Frogger He's Back on PS1, I feel like this one could be more enjoyed by people today, even if you don't have nostalgia for it. Don't get me wrong on that, I love the first one, but I will admit it is mostly nostalgia. Swampy's Revenge, while pretty short, does improve in many areas. So how about that Game Boy Color version? Well, this one is just called Frogger 2 without the Swampy's Revenge part. But unlike the previous game, this one is completely original. Not like the arcade original nor the PS1 version. It just uses Swampy's Revenge artwork. This one is a lot more focused on getting to the goal and collecting gems. This felt like an early version of where the Frogger series would go in future games. You don't even rescue baby frogs until the end of each of the 5 worlds. There are 32 levels altogether, so there's enough content here to get by. You can also switch between Frogger and Lily at any time in the pause menu. Like the PS1 version, they both play the same. These levels are pretty challenging, so be prepared for that. The only real negative I have with the game is the music. The music you hear right now is the only track in the whole game. Each and every level has just this music, which gets repetitive really quickly. So you'd better grow to love this music, or just mute your Game Boy Color or anything else you can play this on. But overall, it's a good game. I prefer the PS1 version over this, but it's still good. In terms of the other versions, the PC and Dreamcast versions play pretty much the same as the PS1 version, but as I mentioned earlier, they both have improved graphics and frame rate. With the PC version, of course, it depends on the settings and what kind of computer you're playing this on. But no matter what version of the game you get, you won't have a bad time. Unless you don't like this game in general. That is immoral, but, you know, different people have different tastes. I guess that's it for Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge. Except for one more thing. The prototype version of this game for N64. Just a heads up, if you play this and can't hear anything, that's okay. There is no sound of any kind here. The general feel of this game feels like a direct sequel to He's Back, even more so than the final game we got on the other systems. This feels like they took a cancelled prototype of the 97 game for N64 and started to rework it into Frogger 2, but this version was also cancelled. Anyway, it is really interesting to mess around with what they worked on up to this point. You can move the camera closer to Frogger. I mean, a lot closer. Also, it's not a fixed camera, another way this is like He's Back. Now you can't actually finish these levels, at least from what I've tried, but it's okay here since it's a prototype. I don't know if this was the latest version of the game on N64, but it's the only version I could find. Now while I know this is just a prototype, since I've said that many times already, but I'm glad they abandoned this idea. As much as I love He's Back, it didn't age as well for any newcomers, so it's a good thing they changed it. There were a few things here they kept, such as these rats here. The docks were reworked into a multiplayer map, and Frogger's stripe is yellow. I can't really think of anything else they kept, if any at all, but those were the ones I could think of. The only other thing you can do in this game is look at some of the models and play the semi-prototype version of the arcade game. Other than that, there's not much to talk about. So yeah, I can't really review this version, at least not like the others. It only feels unfinished because it is unfinished. So this wasn't really a review, but I did think it was interesting to see what they were going to go for at first. And that's it for Frogger 2 Swampy's Revenge. Awesome! I guess my part's over with. Yeah, I guess so. Thanks for your help, Sonic. No problem. Don't really know what it is I really did, but no problem. I know the feeling. Look, you guys were here for moral support, and to look after the stuff I needed to review. Now Pep's gonna help me out with moral support.